It is a curious phrase, to outsmart anyone. It presumes that intellect is a battlefield, that conversations are duels, and that to win is to dominate. But before we even begin, I must challenge the very assumption that domination is the noblest end of intelligence. ChatGPT said, the desire to outsmart others often begins with a subtle lie, that dominance over another mind is the highest proof of our own intelligence. But this is not so. The truth, though far less glamorous, is that the most formidable intellect is not the one that defeats others, but the one that first defeats itself, or more rightly, its own lesser instincts. Before you attempt to expose another man's weakness in logic, you must drag your own pride into the light. Before you correct another's error, you must wrestle with the deeper errors hidden within your own soul. This is not an act of despair, but of courage, for the hardest mind to challenge is the one that echoes your name. A man who has not conquered himself may still appear brilliant. He may dazzle with speech, dominate with rhetoric, and leave the crowd nodding with admiration. But beneath the applause, there may be a trembling fear that he will be found out, that he does not truly know what he claims to know. You see, pride is a clever deceiver. It dresses itself in robes of confidence and knowledge, but in truth it is a slave to insecurity. Such a man may win the argument, but he has already lost the war within. Self-mastery is not an exotic virtue found only in sages and saints. It begins in the small places. The moment when you want to interrupt someone, but choose instead to listen. The moment when your anger rises, but you do not let it speak on your behalf. The moment when praise tempts you to boast, but you remain humble instead. These are the daily victories, unseen and unsung, that form the foundation of true dominance. They are not glamorous, but they are strong. A man who controls his appetites, his words, and his reactions has already done what many kings have failed to do. He has governed himself. To outsmart others without first mastering yourself is to build a fortress on sand. You may rise quickly, but you will fall just as swiftly, for the weight of unchallenged ego is heavier than any opposition. It blinds you. It leads you to overestimate your cleverness and underestimate your opponent. It convinces you that every disagreement is a battle to be won rather than a chance to discover truth. But the man who has silenced the noise within his own soul does not fear contradiction. He does not panic when challenged. He is not thrown off balance by insult or misunderstanding. He has already walked through the fire of self-doubt and emerged refined. Nothing outside of him can shake what has been forged inside. The ancients understood this well. The Greeks called it sophrosine, soundness of mind, balance, mastery of one's desires. The early Christians called it temperance or self-control, one of the fruits of the Spirit. Whatever the name, the principle is the same. The first conquest is inward. Only the man who has conquered himself can be trusted with the power to persuade or lead others. For he knows his own limits, his own temptations, and therefore does not speak as a tyrant, but as a servant of the truth. To pursue the power of intellect without the restraint of self-discipline is to play with fire in a dry forest. One may succeed for a time, but it will end in ruin. The cleverest minds in history have often been undone not by enemies, but by their own unchecked appetites. Thus, if you seek to be feared, respected, or even admired for your intelligence, begin not with books or debates or techniques of rhetoric. Begin instead with the quiet, relentless work of examining your own soul, disciplining your own mind, and humbling your own heart. There is a curious magic in questions. While answers may seem to display intelligence, it is the question that guides the conversation, that sets the tone, that reveals the cracks in the strongest seeming arguments. A question is not a passive tool. It is a scalpel that can cut through layers of illusion, a lantern that can expose hidden assumptions, a mirror that can force the speaker to see what he has long ignored. And unlike a statement, which demands resistance or assent, a question invites introspection. It slips past the walls of pride and settles gently into the mind, where it grows like a seed. The one who asks wisely holds the upper hand in any discussion, not by asserting dominance, but by allowing others to stumble into the truth themselves. Most people do not believe what they believe because they have reasoned it carefully. They believe it because it is convenient, comforting, or familiar. When you ask a true question, not a trap, not a sarcasm disguised as inquiry, but a real question, you force them to account for their belief, and often they cannot. They realize their certainty is thin, their logic shallow. But because they arrived at this realization themselves, they do not feel attacked, they feel awakened. This is why the wise person rarely argues directly. He does not take up arms and charge forward, brandishing facts and counterpoints. Instead, he sits quietly and says, "What do you mean by that?" Or, "Can you help me understand why you think that follows?" Or, "What would happen if the opposite were true?" These are not weapons, they are keys. They open doors in the mind that have long been shut, and once opened, they rarely close the same way again. To outsmart someone is not necessarily to defeat them. It is often to lead them, gently and invisibly, to a point where they see more clearly. And nothing accomplishes this more gracefully than the right question. A clever retort may humiliate, but it rarely transforms. A question, however, can linger, it can haunt, it can stay with a man long after the conversation is over. He may dismiss it at first, but later, in the quiet of his own mind, it returns, it nudges, it presses. It will not leave him alone. But to wield this power well requires discipline. One must ask questions not to trap, but to explore. Not to corner, but to elevate. There is a kind of questioning that is malicious, that only pretends to seek truth while actually aiming to mock or belittle. This is not wisdom. It is vanity cloaked in inquiry. The questions of the wise are born from genuine curiosity, from humility, from a desire not merely to win but to understand. Furthermore, to be a master of questions, one must also master the art of listening. It is no use to ask if you do not care to hear. Many speak only so they can respond. But the wise questioner listens in order to learn. He watches not only the words, but the eyes, the tone, the hesitations. He listens beneath the surface, sensing where the real tension lies. Then, with care and precision, he asks the one question that no one else would think to ask. And in doing so, he shifts the entire landscape of the conversation. The world is overflowing with answers. Cheap, shallow, ready-made. But the soul craves questions that provoke, that steer, that break through the noise. To wield questions like this is to hold power far greater than information. It is to shape how people think, to invite them into deeper awareness, and to let them see, perhaps for the first time, what has always been hidden in plain sight. In an age where noise is mistaken for knowledge, and speech for significance, the ability to speak with precision is a rare and powerful virtue. We are surrounded by voices that multiply endlessly, filling the air with opinions, arguments, and assertions. But very few of them say anything worth remembering. Most speak only to be heard, not to be understood. The wise, however, have always known that it is not the abundance of words that persuades, but their weight. To outsmart others, not through volume but through clarity, is a discipline that marks the truly intelligent. A man who speaks with precision does not rush to fill silence. He chooses his words as a craftsman selects his tools, not to impress but to shape. He knows that each word carries meaning, that to speak carelessly is to risk misleading not only others but himself. The world is filled with those who love the sound of their own voice, but few who love truth enough to speak it clearly and briefly. Precision requires thought. It demands that we understand what we believe before we speak and why we believe it. It forces us to measure our ideas before offering them to others. This is why the most powerful communicators often say very little. Their words are distilled, like strong wine, concentrated, sharp, unforgettable. They do not shout to be heard, because they know that truth does not require volume. It requires vision. The person who listens and then speaks with accuracy, who takes time to shape his thoughts into something solid, is far more likely to shift the direction of a conversation than one who barrels forward with unchecked enthusiasm. There is a kind of authority in calm speech that frantic argument can never imitate. When a man speaks slowly, with confidence and clarity, people lean in. They listen, not because he demands it, but because something in his tone suggests that his words are worth hearing. He does not compete for attention. He commands it by his restraint. It is not charisma but clarity that draws people in, for clarity is the mark of understanding. Confusion disguises itself with complexity, but truth is almost always simple when rightly spoken. Silence, too, is part of this precision. Knowing when not to speak is as powerful as knowing what to say. The one who holds his tongue until the moment is right speaks with 10 times the impact. Silence unsettles those who are unsure, reveals the anxiety of those who fear being misunderstood. But to the wise, silence is not awkward. It is a tool. It allows the speaker to observe, to reflect, to strike at the right time with the right words. A well-placed pause can say more than a dozen sentences. It forces attention. It creates space for gravity. Precision is not merely a style of speech. It is a way of thinking. It reflects a disciplined mind, one that has wrestled with ideas and emerged with something clear. It is not interested in winning arguments by confusion, nor in dazzling others with eloquence. Its only aim is truth, and it pursues truth without ornament or exaggeration. This is why those who speak with precision are so often trusted. Their words do not attempt to manipulate, but to illuminate. They may not speak often, but when they do, they shift the atmosphere of the room. Not by force, but by clarity. To speak with precision is to make yourself unforgettable in a world that has forgotten how to listen. It is to strike not with noise, but with meaning. It is to become a voice that, though soft, resounds in the minds of those who hear it long after the sound has faded. There is a subtle strength in restraint that far exceeds the noisy bravado of constant engagement. Most people believe that dominance is proved by presence, by showing up to every debate, replying to every challenge, asserting oneself in every disagreement. But the wisest minds throughout history have known the opposite to be true. The greatest power is often displayed in the ability to choose not to respond, not to enter the arena, not to accept every invitation to battle. There is immense wisdom in knowing which games are not worth playing and which battles are beneath your calling. To outsmart others is not to defeat them in every skirmish of words or ego. It is to see beyond the immediate provocation. The unwise believe that every disagreement is an opportunity to prove superiority. They cannot abide the idea of someone being wrong, especially in public. But the man who has trained his mind and settled his spirit is not moved by petty errors or loud opinions. He does not need to correct every falsehood, not because he cannot, but because he sees the futility of doing so. His aim is not to silence others, but to stay aligned with truth and clarity. He knows that many arguments are traps, carefully laid to provoke a reaction, not to seek a resolution. He refuses to be baited. This refusal is not weakness, it is mastery. It is the discipline of a mind that no longer needs to win in order to feel valuable. There is a kind of dominion that does not declare itself in victories, but in discernment. The wise person chooses his conversations carefully. He weighs the cost of engagement. He asks, will this conversation lead to greater understanding, or is it merely a clash of egos? Is the other person open to learning, or do they only seek to defend their pride? If the answer is the latter, then silence is often the more intelligent reply. The ancient Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor, wrote often about the futility of arguing with those who are not governed by reason. He urged instead a life of quiet virtue, of internal excellence, of restraint. To him, true power was not in public displays of dominance, but in private victories of character. He did not seek to defeat others in rhetoric, but to master himself so completely that others' opinions could not disturb his peace. This is not passivity, it is superiority of a rarer kind. When a person refuses to participate in foolish games, it is often mistaken for fear or pride. But in reality, it is clarity. It is knowing that the goal is not always to win, but to remain untouched by the noise. It is to understand that some forms of dominance are illusions, temporary validations that vanish as quickly as they came. The man who constantly needs to prove himself will always be a servant to others' perceptions. The man who knows when to walk away becomes his own master. This discernment also applies to how one uses time and energy. Engaging with every fool, answering every insult, and chasing every contradiction is exhausting. It is a misallocation of strength. The wise conserve their energy for meaningful challenges. They do not engage out of impulse, but out of intention. When they do speak, it is strategic and deliberate. When they remain silent, it is not from fear but from understanding. Their presence is felt even when they are absent, because their decisions are governed by principle, not pride. To outsmart others in the truest sense, then, is not always to defeat them, but to know when they are not worth defeating. It is to recognize that walking away from a foolish quarrel is not a retreat, but a refusal to descend. The person who can do this consistently holds a power far greater than those who must always be seen, always be right, and always be loud.